Well, good morning, everyone, and good morning online. If you have a Bible, would you go ahead and open it to Hebrews chapter 3? We're continuing our journey there. And as we get started, I thought I would take a walk down memory lane, at least for some of us. Michael W. Smith was huge in the 90s and actually in the 80s too. And there was a song that he wrote that I think ties in with our passage this morning pretty well. So I thought I'd start with the lyrics from that and get us kind of pondering the heart that goes with this song. Another question in me, one for the powers that be. It's got me thrown. And so I put on my poker face and try to figure it out. This undeniable doubt, a common occurrence, feeling so out of place, guarded, and cynical now, can't help but wondering how my heart evolved into a rock beating inside of me. So I feel such a stoic ordeal. Where's that feeling that I don't feel? And then skipping down through the song, is there a way to return? Is there a way to unlearn that carnal knowledge that's chipping away at my soul? I've been gone too long. Will I ever find my way home? There was a boy who had the faith to move a mountain. Like a child, he would believe without a reason, without a trace. He disappeared into the void, and I've been searching for that missing person. He used to want to try to walk the straight and narrow. He had a fire. He could feel it in the marrow. It's been a long time, and I haven't seen him lately, but I've been searching for that missing person. Now, this morning is a passage that is designed to help missing persons and help us not to become missing persons. One of the, I think, universal realities for anyone who wants to follow Jesus is that life goes up and down, and that sometimes we can drift. And sometimes that drifting goes a lot further than we would ever want. I mean, we wouldn't want any drifting at all, but there's times that we just really lose our footing and kind of get lost along the way. And this morning's passage, he's talking to people who have allowed their hearts to become hardened. Have you ever noticed how easy it is for your heart to become hardened? Even in the most important of relationships, like, what was it, last week we had Valentine's Day. What's that all about, other than making sure that Hallmark stays in business and you can sell flowers? It's a day on the calendar that's designed to say, wait, stop. Remember what's most important in that most important relationship. Don't take it for granted. Don't let it go common. That's why we have anniversaries that we celebrate and birthdays that we celebrate, because life goes on. And there's nothing wrong with life going on, but sometimes as we navigate, we can lose sight of some of the most important things. We can lose some of the intensity of what needs to remain intense. We can lose some of the focus that should be always sharp and clear. And that happens in our relationships with our loved ones, whether it's our spouse or our children or somebody we're in relationship with. It happens in business relationships. It happens in friendships. It happens in all kinds of relationships. And it happens in our relationship with God. And that has massive consequences. That's what this morning's passage is really addressing. He's talking to people who have, just to remind us of what's going on in the audience of Hebrews, they're Christians, but they come from a Jewish ethnic cultural background. And things are getting hard. It's getting tough. There's pushback, there's persecution, there's struggle, and it's becoming tempting because it seems easier to, ironically, just be identified as Jewish and not as Christian. Because in that day and age, in that particular moment, that was safer, that was less intense, that was less standing out, that was less challenge. Only problem is, while that heritage and that background is beautiful and has brought so much good into the world. And in fact, part of the argument of Hebrews is Moses was amazing and the angels are amazing and the original covenant was amazing, but something fresh has come, something that supersedes and something that transcends, and it comes in Jesus, and you can't back away from that. Don't do that. And as he's talking with them in this morning's passage, he's warning them about having their hearts subtly become hardened to the point actually that it erodes their trust and they begin to disbelieve. And if you want to follow along, let's read this section of scripture and let's be asking the Spirit to search our own hearts, to say, Lord, am I getting a little hard around the edges anywhere? Am I sliding towards disbelief or at least lack of trust? Because this passage is intended to both help us analyze that and then give us some tools to address it. So following along, starting in verse 7, it reads like this. Therefore, as the Holy Spirit says, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion on the day of testing in the wilderness, where your fathers put me to the test and saw my works for 40 years. Therefore I was provoked with that generation and said, they always go astray in their heart. They have not known my ways. As I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Take care, brothers, and this is the collective brothers and sisters, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. But exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we have come to share in Christ, if indeed we hold our original confidence firm to the end. As it is said, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. For who were those who heard and yet rebelled? Was it not all those who left Egypt led by Moses? And with whom was he provoked? For 40 years. Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who were disobedient? So we see that they were unable to enter because of unbelief. Now, a couple of structural things to help us pull the thread through tightly. Most of this is absorbed either with a quote from Psalm 95, which is what Nate started us with, and it picks up at the very word where he said, okay, we're going to stop there. That's where it starts quoting. And it finishes much of the psalm. So it's quoting that, and it also is looking further back. It's looking through the lens of Psalm 95 at the history of the Jewish people in the time of Moses. Okay, now these are Jewish Christians, and so he is very intentionally bringing things up in their mind that he wants us to bring up in our mind too, because this is exactly what they would have been thinking of. We need to be thinking of those passages too. Psalm 95 should be in the background of our mind, and the entire story of the Exodus through Deuteronomy story should also be in the back of our minds. And he's pulling that to their attention, and he's saying, I want you to be careful because you don't want to follow in their footsteps, because it was devastating. And in doing that, he gives us a couple of verbal clues that draw out the key points, kind of like links in a chain where these kind of carry us through the passage. So the first part of the link starts in verse 7 where he quotes. He says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. Okay? And then if you turn, well, I'll turn the page. Maybe you don't have to, but it shows how egocentric I am. I'm turning my page. You must be too. Verse 15, as it is said, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. Exactly the same words. Those are direct quote, and he quotes it twice. He's making a real point. Don't harden your hearts. That's central to what he wants us to look at. Don't harden your hearts. It's so important. It controls both sections of this passage that we're looking at this morning. And then he kind of expands on that, because that hardening of heart can lead somewhere that is really devastating. And so that shows up a couple of different times. Verse 12, take care, brothers or brothers and sisters, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart. This idea of unbelief is really central. You harden your heart, and then things happen, and the next thing you know, you may find yourself not trusting God. You may find yourself doubting. You may even find yourself disbelieving, right? Then he repeats, don't harden your hearts. And then he repeats the idea of unbelief. It's the last word, in fact, in the text. So we see, verse 19, that they were unable to enter because of unbelief. Okay, so his point is this: be careful. Be careful. Don't be like our ancestors. Their failure was so spectacular. In fact, the psalmist, hundreds of years later, uses them as an example, saying, don't follow them. So now I'm going to use the psalmist and them and say, don't follow them. Don't be like them. Their hearts were hardened, and they ultimately fell into disbelief. Guard yourself from that. That's what he wants to get across, and that actually carries through to our day. It's been preserved for us for exactly the same reason. Hardness of heart creeps in, and it can erode our faith, and it can erode our trust. It can it can be a wedge that separates us relationally from God, and it can erode that relationship in devastating ways. And he says, be careful of that. Now, he points us to the people in the Old Testament, the people of the Exodus. And as we look at their story, we can see some of the things that can threaten to harden our hearts. He points us directly, and we'll look at these passages each in turn briefly. He points us directly to Exodus 17. When he talks about the day you tested in the wilderness, that's a direct reference to Exodus 17. We'll see that in a minute. So there's something very specific going on there. Here's one of the causes or one of the triggers for a hardening heart that leads to unbelief, Exodus 17. But he also expands our vision beyond just that passage, because he says, your fathers put me to the test and saw my works for 40 years. I want you to not just consider that moment of testing, but I want you to consider all 40 years. The next verse, they always go astray in their heart. There's stuff going on that whole time. So what happened with that generation that we can learn from and maybe guard our own hearts? Well, let's turn first to Exodus 17. Let's start with the most direct reference. People of Israel have been slaves for generations. They have been oppressed by what was then really the only world superpower, Egypt. And God shows up and he says, you are mine, and I'm going to deliver you. And in doing that, Pharaoh, the leader of Egypt, who has a hardened heart himself, leads his nation into destruction. There's this direct showdown between God and Pharaoh, and ultimately the whole system, the political and religious system of Egypt, and it leaves Egypt in ruins. Because every battle God starts, God wins. And so Egypt is essentially ruined, and the people who were enslaved and oppressed are now freed. And they are in the wilderness, heading towards Mount Sinai, which is where God is taking them. But the journey is difficult. Now, they've seen all kinds of amazing things. They've seen a series of 10 plagues that were sufficient to literally ruin Egypt. And then there's this crescendo where after they escape, when Pharaoh finally says, please go now, he changes his mind again, hardens his heart, and chases after them with his army and all of the chariots and all of the soldiers. And they are penned between the Red Sea and the Egyptian army. And it's like, we're no match for them. We're slaves. We make bricks. We do what we're told. We don't have any skills. We don't have any weapons. We're going to die. And in that moment, God shows up and he literally parts the Red Sea. Now imagine that, how striking that would be. We're heading off to Cambodia this week, and if God said, actually you're gonna walk, which would be a really long way, so I wouldn't be real excited about that, but suddenly the Pacific Ocean splits open and you can walk, that would be extraordinary. That ought to change your life forever. Well, they've just had that experience. Now they're in the wilderness, and it's desert, and desert is a tough place. And that's kind of where we'll pick it up. All the congregation of the people of Israel, verse 1 of Exodus 17. All the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of sin. That's not what they were doing there, although actually it was what they were doing there, but that's the name. The wilderness of sin by stages, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Well, it's desert, so that's not actually surprising. So they are God's people. They should look to God for help because they have a real need here. Therefore, the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" Right? The issue is not that they're expecting water because God should provide that for them. He's sent them there and he's their God. It's what's in their hearts. They've experienced all of these things and they still don't trust God. They have this demandingness. Here's what God has to do. Here's when he has to do it. Here's how he has to do it. They don't come with any humility, no expectation. There's no relational connection at all. It's very instrumental, and God is just somebody who's supposed to meet their demands. And he's not doing that, and this is really hard. They're in a place of real pain. Right? One of the things that really makes us vulnerable to having our hearts become hard is pain. When things are painful, how do we respond? And particularly, how do we respond to God? Because when I have real pain in my life, God can't be excused from the conversation. If he's sovereign and he's my God, somehow he has to be involved in the conversation. This hurts. God's in there somewhere. We got to talk this thing through. How? How do I respond to God in that moment? What does that look like? The people of Israel are quarreling. They're grumping. They're demanding. We'll continue, verse 3. The people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and say, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" There's so much drama. Why is it that we get so dramatic when we're not feeling good? He parted the Red Sea and he destroyed Egypt to protect you. Just ask him. Just ask him. Don't start complaining and griping and accusing and making it all dramatic. "Oh, you brought us out here so if I'd wanted you to die, I could have left you there." If you keep going like you are, maybe that God's more gracious than I am, right? There's multiple times I'd have gone, "Fine, you get what you want." Why did you bring us out here to die? So Moses cried to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They're almost ready to stone me." That's how worked up they are. That's how angry. That's how frustrated. It's all because this pain point has come and they're not handling it all well. They're not going to God in their pain. They're attacking God because of their pain. Verse 5, the Lord said to Moses, "Pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb." They're at Mount Sinai. That's another name for Sinai. "You shall strike the rock and water shall come out of it and the people will drink." Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah because of the quarreling of the people of Israel and because they tested the Lord by saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" That's what Massah and Meribah mean, quarreling and testing. Right, so that's what the writer of Hebrews is quoting. That's what the writer of the Psalms is quoting. He's saying, be careful. Don't let your heart become hard like theirs. At this place of testing, here's what went on. And the thing that was the trigger for that hardening, or the evidence for that hardening, or probably a little bit of both, chicken or egg, was they just didn't handle pain well. It was hard. It hurt. And they went off the rails. So pain is one of those things we have to be very careful with. What do we do with pain? If you want to turn over to Exodus chapter 14, we'll see another key theme that caused their hardening of heart, and that's fear. When I'm afraid, I got to be careful how I react. When I'm afraid, I can't excuse God from that conversation either. He's got to be right in the middle of it. So how do we talk? What do we do? Right? Fear comes when I am concerned that I don't know what's going to happen next, and it could be really bad, and I don't really have control. Right? Now think about that. I never know what's going to happen next. And it actually could be bad, and I never have control. Fear's a really big issue because it's always lurking. There's always an occasion or an opportunity that could throw me off, where I could be overcome by fear. How I handle myself and how I respond to God in that moment is really critical because it's a moment that is going to visit over and over again. So they're in a moment of fear. Let's pick up the story, right? This is actually when they're penned against the Red Sea. And verse 10 of Exodus 14 says, when Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. Good so far. Immediately go off the rails. They said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt? I don't know what their hang up is. They're saying the same thing over and over again. Is it because there's no graves in Egypt that you've taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would be better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Now just stop for a second. Here's what they're saying. It's like, oh, there's no graves there, so you bring us out here to kill us. Well, that's really stupid. He's done all of these great miracles. There is a pillar, a giant burning cloud of God's presence right there. And here comes Pharaoh's army. Scary moment, absolutely. Are they outmatched? Absolutely. Is this treacherous and dangerous? Absolutely. But then what? See, that's the point. They're in relationship with a living God who's manifested himself, so he's literally standing right there. There's this cloud they can see right there. And they get all worked up. And they say it would have been better. That's why we said, don't leave us alone. We're happy as slaves. They're not happy as slaves. The reason God told Moses, hey, I'm going to deliver them is I've heard their groaning. This is horrible. They were oppressed. They're abused. This is not how I want my people living. And so God actually delivers them, but they're like, oh, don't do that. It would have been better if we just stayed there. It's like something's gone off. They're not even saying things they actually fundamentally believe. But the fear's taken over. And as they're interacting with God, fear is winning. And that's where their hearts are on this hardening journey. Verse 13, Moses said to the people, fear not. Stand firm. See the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You have only to be silent. Wow. God's got this. In fact, he even intimates maybe part of the reason for this scary moment is so that God could do a great work. It's in this scary moment that God's going to finally and fully neutralize Egypt. It's not just I'm delivering you into the future. You got to trust me. Do not let your fear drive a wedge between you and me. Yes, this is scary. Yes, this is hard. Yes, you're out of your depths. Yes, you don't know what's going to happen next, but I do. It's not hard for me. I'm not out of my depths. You're mine. Don't let that become a wedge. Don't let that create a hardness of heart towards me. All right, and the same theme shows up actually at the end in a way of the narrative because they're on a journey for a year and then they blow it and then they wander around going nowhere for a while. So at the end of the year-long journey, Numbers 14, if you want to follow along, familiar passage if you just want to listen. They finally come to the promised land. They send in spies to spy it out and say, wow, it's pretty amazing, but it's really, 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 really scary because there's really, really big, mean people there, and we're scared. And that's enough background for this passage. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, this is Numbers 14:1, and wept that night. All the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt. Would that we had died in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? They are so stuck. It's like, our wives, our little ones will become prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, let's choose a leader and go back to Egypt. And then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the people of Israel. Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, the land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord and do not fear the people of the land. He says it again, do not fear them. And then in verse 11, God speaks to Moses, how long will this people despise me? How long will they not believe in me in spite of all the signs I have done among them? I've worked so many times and in so many ways, yet a scary thing came up, and here we are again. They're immediately ready to abandon me, immediately ready to go make their own plans, which will utterly devastate them. They won't trust me. Fear is driving them. That's in the background. In the psalmist's mind, the writer of the Hebrews' mind, he's saying, guard your heart so they don't become hardened. Hardening happens easily when we're afraid. Final thing we'll look at this morning for background. Numbers chapter 11. So pain is an issue I've got to learn to deal with rightly with God. Fear is an issue I've got to learn to deal with rightly with God. And then the last one we're going to talk about is disappointment, because that's really important and central to the story of the Exodus too. It's the kind of thing that the writer of Hebrews would want us thinking about. They got disappointed with God, and they hardened themselves because of that. You ever get disappointed with God? It wasn't supposed to be this way. It was supposed to be better than this. It was supposed to go differently. It wasn't supposed to be so hard. You fill in the blank, right? For them, they just got tired. They got tired of it. God, it's supposed to be better than this. So in Exodus 11, the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes. Yes, you were so unfortunate to be delivered from generations of slavery and to walk through the Dead Sea or Red Sea and to see God manifest himself directly and have all these miracles worked for you and water in the wilderness and the manna that he's been feeding them, right? There's not an in and out along the way. We got to eat. How are we going to eat? We're supposed to eat all our flocks, then there won't be any flocks when we get to the land. You know, they gripe about everything. It's like, no, I got this covered too. I will give you manna. Every single morning it will be there. In fact, I'll give it to you in such a way that you can have rest that I want you to build into your week. So you'll have enough on the Friday manna process, manifestation. I don't know what it would be. You'll have enough then that you can get first Saturday and you don't have to pick up again until Sunday. So you can rest on Saturday like I want you to do. Right? He's taking care of them. And they're complaining about their misfortunes. And there's more detail, but we'll pick it up if you're in the passage. Numbers 11:16 is where I'm starting again. It says, then the Lord said to Moses, gather for me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people and officers over them, and bring them to the tent of meeting. Let them take their stand there with you, and I will come down and talk with you there, and I will take some of the spirit that is on you and put it on them, and they shall bear the burden of the people with you, so that you may not bear it yourself alone. See, the people and their constant whining have finally broken Moses down. He's like, I can't take it, God. Now he says, kill me. You know, I can't do this anymore. God's like, I got you too. And here's what we're going to do. And so he gives all these partners in ministry, and he fills them with the Spirit. And then verse 18, say to the people, consecrate yourselves for tomorrow, and you shall eat meat. You've been complaining about manna? You know, where's the filet mignon? Well, here's what's going to happen. You're going to eat meat, for it was better for us in Egypt, they said. You were saying, who will give us meat? Well, therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall not eat just 1 day, or 2 days, or 5 days, or 10 days, or 20 days. I think God's getting a little irritated with them. But a whole month, until it comes out your nostrils, and becomes loathsome to you because you have rejected the Lord who is among you. Right? You've rejected the Lord. Their hearts were hardened. They were disappointed. It wasn't supposed to go this way. There was supposed to be a better plan. We're your people. What's that good for? Manna? Ugh. Could you give us like a hamburger? Could I have steak? Earlier, the first service, I said bacon because that's what I think of, but it's like, wait, they're Jewish, so they probably don't have bacon. Maybe turkey bacon, I don't know. There's two kinds of people who like bacon and people that are wrong. And so they probably had turkey bacon because it wouldn't violate the covenant. They wouldn't do that. But they're complaining, right? We just have manna. Ooh, icky. It's like, what's going on here? It seems like over and over again, your hearts grow hard towards me. There's this wedge driven. When something gets hard and it gets painful, you don't know how to handle the pain with me and you turn against me. When something is scary, and that happens an awful lot, you don't know how to handle the fear with me, so you turn against me. When something isn't working out the way that you wanted, the way that you expected, it's not going as wonderfully as you thought, you're disappointed in me, and you turn against me. And over again, it's those kinds of things that creep in, and their hearts become hardened towards God. Little wedges are driven, and they harden in their hearts. And ultimately undermines everything to the point of unbelief. That's why the writers of Hebrews is calling that out, because those dynamics work today too, don't they? How often is it one of those things that undoes me in my walk with Jesus? This hurts. Suddenly I'm off the rails. I'm afraid. Suddenly I'm off the rails. I'm just disappointed. Suddenly I'm off the rails. There's a verse that's important to keep in mind as we process this, back in Hebrews chapter 3. It's talked about not hardening, not having an unbelieving heart. That's verse 12. Verse 13, exhort one another every day as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. Here's what happens. I have an alternative narrative in my mind. It's not supposed to be this way. And when my narrative doesn't line up with God's plan, I struggle. And the problem is my narrative is constantly reinforced by a culture and a society and the old patterns in me that are very much shaped by sin. And sin fundamentally lies. And so the narrative that is putting me in conflict with God is fundamentally based on lies. It is a deception that is being perpetrated on my own heart, sometimes by my own heart, with help from others. A couple of weeks ago, when we were in Ecuador, one of the couples we met has a ministry rescuing people from human trafficking. Super important ministry. Asked them what they did, and they said, we're trying to get ahead of it. We're trying to prevent it in the first place. So they're doing a number of things to get out ahead, because here's how human trafficking happens. Overwhelmingly, it's a pretty narrative that is an absolute lie that leads to bondage and devastation. Somebody who's oppressed, somebody who's suffering, somebody who's hopeless, somebody whose every moment is a struggle, is given a ray of hope. Hey, I've got a job for you. I can take you to Spain, I can take you to France, I can take you to America. You don't have to struggle like this anymore. In fact, you can get a job that's good enough, you can send some money home to your family. It's great. There's no job. There's no intention of good. It's a bald-faced lie intended to lead to bondage that will be utterly destructive. But they don't know that. And they buy into that. And they entrust themselves to that. And then it's too late. He's saying hardness of heart is rooted in the deceitfulness of sin. There are these stories, these pretty stories, these lies that are being told to us all the time by our own sinful past, by the culture that surrounds us, by all kinds of things. And those lies intersect actually often the very things that we've seen in the Exodus accounts. Pain. Oh, if God really cared, we wouldn't hurt. That's not right. That's a lie. Jesus specifically said, in this world you will have tribulation. But take heart. I've overcome it. Or another lie that comes with that is, yeah, but it's too much. This is not worth it. That's a lie. Paul, under the influence of the Spirit, twice says this: I don't consider that our sufferings right now are even worthy to be compared to what God is doing through them. That's a lie. But because it's painful, because the lie itself is pretty, I'm not guarding myself. I buy that lie. The deceitfulness of sin has got its hooks into me. And then my heart starts to harden towards God. Same thing when it comes to fear. He said, I will never leave you or forsake you. Right? Or disappointment. God's not holding out on me. He doesn't have something better that I should have. He said, I gave you my son. What good thing would I ever withhold? If there's a disappointment here, it's because we've got alternative narratives. And the solution isn't to run from me, it's to run towards me. Right? And this isn't just a simple pat answer kind of thing. Right? Sometimes I'm really hurting, and it takes a while for my narrative to line up with his. That's what lament really is when sometimes I just need to turn away from it. Just stop it, right? There's that comedy routine. Some of you have seen Bob Newhart as the therapist. Just stop it. Well, actually, sometimes that's not bad. Just stop it. Knock it off. But often it's much more complex. It's much more challenging. There's all kinds of things that wrap in. We're very complex and we're broken. And there's all of these issues that make it hard sometimes. And so I want to see God work and I want to change. I want to see things the way he does, but I don't. And I can't just make myself. That's what lament does. It brings me and God into conversation in the middle of my pain and invites him over time to move my narrative over to his. Right? But there's also some things in this passage, both explicit and implicit, that are helpful too. So start with the explicit one. Verse 13. He's just talked about don't have an unbelieving heart, but, and here's the command, exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that no one of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. Live in real community. That's the command. And the irony, and I see this over and over again as a pastor who tries to help people, sometimes when pain goes up, or when fear goes up, or when disappointment goes up, the natural response is to run away. That is exactly the wrong thing to do. That is the most devastating thing to do. I cannot do it on my own. I need you. And he's saying, look, the deceitfulness of sin is going to sell you these false narratives. They're going to set you at odds with God, and you're going to find your heart hardening and maybe even your whole beliefs being undermined. You need each other, and you need to be there for each other. Be those who exhort each other and encourage each other so that the deception is unmasked. Now, that's not just talking about hanging out together. That's talking about people who really are in each other's lives and in appropriate ways up in each other's grill, in each other's business. right? But also in appropriate ways with the appropriate heart. We live in a culture there's lots of people who will speak to us. Pick carefully who you're listening to. There's a lot who will echo, and there's a lot of ego, and there's some downright bullies. None of those are helpful. I can find people who will reflect back to me what I'm already feeling and wanting to hear. They'll just echo. That's it, like, oh, you're good. Oh, you do what's best for you. It's like, that's ridiculous. I got into this situation. I need help getting out, and I obviously am not on the right track here, so don't tell me I am. Love me where I am, but help me. Right? Or people who are just driven by their own ego, they don't even listen. So they might have pat answers, which is not helpful. I need you to love me. I need you to not just be answers. Sometimes I need you to hurt with me too. But I do need to be able to trust you. And then there's people that seem to have taken it into their mind that the truth is a hammer and it's always best applied with great force to your head. And they're just being bullies. Don't listen to any of them. Find people who actually understand. Life's hard. It hurts. We're in this together. God is immensely graceful, and he can work through all of us. Ephesians 4 always apply it. Let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth. But another verse that I think is really beautiful is Philippians 3:18, where Paul talks about people that I've been warning you of, and I do that now even with tears. Listen to the voices of people who will tell you the truth through tears, right? He's saying, exhort one another daily, every day, as long as it's today. There's both a sense of duration and urgency. Live in community all the time and lean in and pick your community well. That's the explicit thing. The implicit thing is actually the psalm that's in the background here. Remember how Nate started the service and we were reading and he said, stop. That was the pivot point, and the immediate next words were the passage we've been reading, right? That's all the warning. That's all here's the hard stuff. Everything prior to that is part of the solution, right? Don't harden your hearts. Instead, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let's come into his presence with thanksgiving. Let's make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise. The Lord is great, a great king above all gods. In his hands are the depths of the earth. The heights of the mountains are his also. The sea is his. He made it. His hands formed the dry land. Come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord, our maker. He's our God. We are the people of his pasture, the sheep of his hand. There are two primary forms of praise psalm, one of which focuses on the grand things that God has done and says, wow. And then the other thing is the concrete actions he's done on our behalf and says, whoa. And he's doing both. He's like, remember, he holds it all in his hands. He created it all. He made the sea. He made the dry land. Whoa. Take note of that. And then he's our God, the rock of our salvation. We are the sheep of his pasture. There's something very personal there. I think in order for this to really be activated in our lives, we just have to look at the world around us with a little bit different eyes. If you walk out here and you look up, the higher you look up on the hill, the more cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching those houses are, right? So right in this neighborhood, amazingly enough, they're probably $1 million, and then up and up and up. Why is that? Well, because everybody wants to have the wow. We walk in the neighborhood, and we were up on one of the hills on a walk a couple of days this week. Actually, you could see everything. You could see San Clemente. You could see what's the big one everyone goes to? Catalina. Yeah, you can see Catalina, and you can see the glint of the ocean. You could also see San Clemente beyond there, which is hard to see most of the time because it's 65 miles out. You could see everything. The reason people pay big bucks is because of the wow. Right? Wonder is something. Just slow down, and there are things that you see in the world around you that evoke wonder. But wonder shouldn't stop there. It should move to worship. There's a personal response that says, wow, God, wow. And now I'm worshiping him. That's what the psalmist is doing. He says, do this. Don't let your heart be hardened. And then he gets very concrete. And that's where the thanksgiving side comes. And there is a time for pausing and praising, and there's a time maybe for what those standing stones that were set up of old. And so I brought you two little bits of my life. This is a pause and pray. This is a standing stone. Just moments to say, wow, God, you worked. So those prayer cards, of which I think there's now 17 left because 2 people have already grabbed them, came in this. They were supposed to come on Monday night. UPS tracker, it was saying that all along, right? Ordered them as soon as we possibly could, but they were coming in Monday night. So David said, Monday's not when we need them Saturday night so we can give them on Sunday. Can we pray? So we prayed. God, you can make it happen faster. And I went out to the mailbox yesterday, and there they were, 2 days early. Now, is that a miracle? I don't know. Getting UPS 2 days faster, I don't know if that's a miracle or not, but I'm counting it as a work of God because we prayed, and he answered, and now there's cards for at least a few of you that you can say, wow, I can support this Cambodian team. And it came in this, and this is going into our recycling bin when I get home. This is not sticking around too long, but it's a reminder. And when we saw that, we paused, we prayed, we said, thank you. There was a moment to actually enter in, catch God in what he's doing, and sit in that. This is a standing stone because this is something that sits in our garage. Years ago, somebody said, I want to take you to coffee. And so we went to a local coffee house and got the coffee, and then we went out and sat in the car in the parking lot. That felt a little weird, like, are we doing a drug deal or whatever? And there was a reason. And he had this in a bag, and he said, pull that out. I think you'll really love this coffee. And I pulled it out, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure I won't. He said, but before you open it, let me tell you, this is between me and God. You have got nothing to say about it. This is something God told me to do. Okay. Now open it up. It was stuffed full of cash. It's like, wow, I did like the coffee after all. And it was like, okay, there was a need coming. I didn't even know. I was not aware of the need. And God was talking to this other guy and saying, here's what we're going to do. And he was faithful, and God was doing something. And all I did was receive the grace of God in a moment. I didn't even know I needed it yet, and the need showed up right afterwards. It's like, wow, that's totally a God thing. So this sits in our garage. When we pull in, we see that and go, yeah, God does that. God does big things. He does little things. He's engaged in our lives. The psalmist is pitting praise, if you will, against that hardening of heart. Thanksgiving against that hardening of heart. So part of my soft heart regimen is to actually see God in my life. He's there. He's working. There are things to say thank you for. There are things to praise him for in every circumstance. Doesn't mean painful circumstances aren't painful. They could be excruciating. But I've never been through one, nor have I ever talked to anyone who was really thoughtful about it, who couldn't say, and in the midst of this, here's where I see God. I hate this, but I trust him. He says, don't let your hearts grow hard. Don't let unbelief take root. Exhort one another and live in dynamic praise. Don't let fear drive you. Don't let pain drive you. Don't let disappointment drive you. Meet me in that. But whatever you do, don't let it drive a wedge, because that's not going to do you any good. Remember those people of old? They all dropped dead in the wilderness and missed everything. That wasn't what I wanted. That's what they required. Don't follow them. Lord, I pray that you would help us. May we be quick to praise, quick to see your hand, quick to say thank you, quick to encourage each other, Lord. May we not use words as weapons, but may we also not use them as placebos. May we actually have real things to say to one another that really help and encourage and challenge and strengthen. May we, by your grace, continue the journey with you, strong to the end. And Lord, as we take this offering, I pray that you would use these gifts to further your kingdom purposes here and around the world. In Jesus' name, amen.
As the